Welcome to the newest episode of All Things LOCS, where we discuss everything related to leadership, operations, culture, and strategies for growth. And now today we're talking about something that a lot of you out there know all too well about, which is what happens when you're dealing with a crisis. Or maybe you're not dealing with a crisis situation, but you're one of those leaders that just deals with a lot of pressure every single day. And the real question is not just how do I deal with the crisis or how do I deal with the pressure, but really how do I recalibrate? How do I get back to baseline? Or maybe how do I get to a point where I can learn from the crisis and the pressure? And realistically, we know that burnout is a major issue in healthcare, and this is a huge part of it. Now today, we have Savio Clemente. He's a keynote speaker, a board-certified health and wellness coach, a journalist, and he's a 2-time cancer survivor. Now he's working with leaders and healthcare executives to help them understand not just how to deal with the crisis and how to deal with the pressure, but really how to take away a lot of the unnecessary stress and how to really get yourself into a position where you can do what leaders are really meant to do, which is making high impact decisions. Because at the end of the day, how you act as the leader has a trickle-down effect to how your team acts. So if you're leading a team, this is going to be an episode you definitely want to check out. I'll see you there.
So, welcome to the show. We got Savio P. Clemente. We're really fired up to have you. You know what? I want to dive into a couple of things because you are so unique in this sense. So we've interviewed like doctors, surgeons, all different types of people on the show. And one of the common things that they all say is like, hey, I've performed thousands and thousands of this particular surgery, but I don't know how it feels. No one's ever done it to me. No one's ever kind of opened up my back, given me a knee replacement, but I do it all the time. And you come from such a unique situation where you're both the patient and also someone that's coaching, healthcare executives. And, for myself, like my mother is a nurse, and for over 10 years, she was in oncology. That's where she worked at. And, I've also myself, like I've had family members, pass away from cancer, and they've had, very different experiences. So I want to kind of dive into that because I definitely would love to hear, your perspective of working with executives when they do something wrong, getting back on the horse, of overcoming some of those mental hurdles when they make a mistake. But it's a little bit different when it's a patient maybe experiencing that. So I'd like to dive in, just tell us, a little bit more about you, but then also just you being a 2-time cancer survivor, I would love to dive into that because that's really, really awesome.
Yeah. So I'm a keynote TEDx speaker, healthcare leadership strategist, journalist. At this point, I've interviewed over 2,000 leaders, thought leaders, even celebrities, board-certified health and wellness coach, best-selling author, and as you mentioned, a 2-time cancer survivor. I initially got diagnosed in 2014 with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, stage 3, and then I was cancer-free for a decade, and then I had a relapse in June of 2024. My central thesis is really, I speak with healthcare leaders on how they can regain clarity and make high-stakes decisions after disruption. As you know, there's a lot of disruption happening in our world right now. So my central thesis is when the pressure hasn't gone quiet, but it's gone internal, and so its performance doesn't fail first, clarity does.
When I like that saying of what's underneath the iceberg, because anyone kind of getting a visual of an iceberg. So I grew up in Alaska. So when you think of like underneath the glacier, like I've literally been on top of glaciers, and it's so wild because they're massive, bodies of frozen water, but underneath it, it's just like 20 times bigger. Mm-hmm. So, to walk through us a little bit of when you had like your first diagnosis and what kind of changed maybe the second time in terms of your mentality.
Sure. So like I mentioned earlier, I was diagnosed in 2014. I came back from a trip with a friend from Paris, Amsterdam, and London. I was noticing while I was there that I was having drenching night sweats. I thought that was strange because I was in Europe. Came back.
Right. The water maybe or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I came back and I noticed a little bit of belabored breathing, a little bit of distension in the stomach. And at that moment in my life in 2014, I was actually only seeing a naturopath. I not that I didn't believe in medicine. I kept myself physically well. I ate organic foods. I exercised 6 days a week, spinning, boxing, strength training. I was eating all the right protein amounts of food. And so he looked at my blood work and he's like, Savio, this is really strange. It could be 3 things. I don't want to alarm you, but you should really go seek mainstream medicine and go get a sonogram. And I'm like, why a sonogram? And he wouldn't tell me. So I went to go get a sonogram a couple days later, and they wouldn't let me leave the office for about an hour and a half. After an hour and a half, they came out and said to me to get a relative to come pick me up and take me to the hospital. I'm like, what are you talking about? I drove here. And they're like, no, come have someone pick you up. So my dad came to pick me up, took me to the hospital, and within an hour and a half, they admitted me to the 5th floor. Later that night, I heard the nurses whispering that I'd be transferred to the 7th floor, which they called the cancer floor. So I had an idea what it was. It wasn't until a day later that they told me it was stage 3 non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. I was bedridden for a week because of the stomach distension. In my stomach, I had ascites, and in the ascites was a lymphoma. They had to distend about 8 liters of fluid over the course of those 7 days. I stayed for an extra 6 days. And 2 days before I left, the medical director came to me and she said, we know your health history, we know you're in good health, and we know that you don't even take aspirin, but you need to start something called R-CHOP chemotherapy. If you don't start it, we don't know where you'll be. And so I chose, there's a longer story as to why I made that decision, but I chose to move forward with it. And I left the hospital, had an additional 5 rounds every 3 weeks. And then in about 4.5 months, about 5 days before Christmas, after scans and blood work, I was told I was in remission. I was in remission for a decade until June of 2024.
So going back in time, do you wish they would have just told you flat out, you know, instead of like, hey, we don't know, because in your story right now, just they didn't want to tell you anything. Is that just kind of common practice, or like, hey, let's just not alarm the person, you know, get someone to drive you? Or do you feel like, hey, they just should have told me?
Okay, so about 4 years ago, I wrote a book, became a bestseller, where I've interviewed, at this point, 200 cancer survivors. I told 35 of their stories, told my own. And in most of their stories, everyone had a choice. Everyone was given the diagnosis. They had time to think about what they wanted to do. I was bedridden in a hospital, 15 days. I didn't really have much choice. This was before AI. Yes, I had Google, but I didn't really have anything to rely on for context. So whether or not they do that traditionally, I'm not sure. I think I was just a special case in the sense that everything was rushed so quickly within a matter of hours. Would I have preferred to be told and then make a decision? I think my situation was so bad because of the ascites and lymphoma that they had to act fast. And so would I, in a perfect world, would have wanted them not to whisper that I had cancer and to flat out tell me? Yeah, that would have been nice. But the thing is, I'm the type of person who I'm awake. I'm not someone who falls asleep at the wheel, so to speak. So I make sure that I am consistently and constantly always trying to figure out the next step. And so for me, I was just trying to do the best I can. I overheard that conversation, and that's how it was.
I'm curious because, as you said, it's a very quick process in your instance, right? There's not a lot of, well, let's talk about it, and it's no, every minute counts here. From the patient perspective, I'm always curious to know what was going through your head when you're seemingly very healthy. Like you said, you're in Europe traveling. I mean,
boxing.
Yeah, like
dang.
I'm looking at you now, and you still look very young. So we're going back to 2014. It's like, all right, and then boom, all of a sudden you're sick, and it's got this massive diagnosis. What's honestly at that point going through your head? Because I think that's the part where a lot of medical professionals maybe don't consider it, that emotional aspect of, all right, like we have to take some action, but there is another piece to this as well.
Yeah. So 3 things. One, I counted because I was very alert. I had about 19 touch points from nurses to doctors. I don't know why I had 19 of them. I don't know why they took such great care of me. I can't even fault them for anything that transpired in those 15 days. It was, I wouldn't say flawless, but it was pretty great. Second thing is I asked them, I was like, how does one have lymphoma? I really didn't know much about it except it's a blood cancer. And they said, we just really don't know. They said, sometimes it's maternal and paternal, but that's just very rare. I asked both my parents. They said nobody on either side of their family that they know of ever had something like this. And then the third thing is probably the most visceral thing, is that most people think about oh my gosh, I'm going to die. And this was a central theme in all the interviews I did with cancer survivors, that they're trying to dispel the notion that cancer is not a death sentence. But in 2014, I didn't really worry about dying. I was actually more worried about that I didn't live fully, that I didn't do what I came here to do, that I disappointed others and myself. That was the pervading thing that was running through my mind, that I didn't complete the assignment. Now, none of us know what the assignment is, but I just feel like I didn't do it. I fell short of doing it. So that was the most terrifying thing for me. And obviously the weeks after that, with going for 5 to 6 hours getting chemotherapy, my dad, my mom, my sister was like, do you want me to come with you? I'm like, you staring at me for 5 to 6 hours getting chemo is not going to make me any better. It's just not. So my dad's like, well, okay, let's, can I pick you up at least? I'm like, yeah, you can pick me up. And so he would pick me up after the 5-6 hours. And I am a firm believer that no matter what is sent your way, it is your responsibility to carry that cross. So I'm not making any biblical overtures here, but I do believe when it comes to anything in one's life, mine's happened to be so dramatic as cancer, it is your job. No one can carry that cross for you. You have to carry it yourself.
You know, one of the major aspects of getting a diagnosis such as that, or, you know, some people get diagnosis less serious, but maybe it's just more physically debilitating or what have you. But it's a lot of uncertainty that surrounds that, right? There's no, this is exactly how it's going to go. It's a lot of, we're not really sure, or these are the percentages, right? So I'm curious to know not only how you dealt with it, but that's the biggest challenge that we see, not just in healthcare, but even in, I think, society as a whole. People have a lot of struggles dealing with not knowing what's going to happen even just the next day. And you're sitting there saying, dude, I got cancer. I don't even know if I'm going to live. So it's like, what enabled you to maybe overcome that uncertainty? And then how is that a great lesson for you in terms of your own teaching, especially with people in healthcare where they actually do struggle with that a lot?
Yeah. So I think the number one thing that I did, which just came very intuitive to me, is to reframe the situation. So before I decided to say yes to the chemotherapy in the hospital, not that I really had a choice, but I did sort of have one, I relied with a good friend. I relied on a good friend who was probably at that moment in time was the wisest person I knew. And she's like, why would you want to put all those like poisons in your body? You know, it ravages the whole body system. And I had to think really clearly. And I don't know if it was my adrenaline. I don't know if it was something spiritual. I don't know if it was just a memory that just came floating into my brain. But I remembered a movie that I watched. It's called Little Buddha, starring Keanu Reeves. He played Siddhartha, which is the Buddha before he became enlightened. And in the movie, Keanu Reeves, as Siddhartha, was meditating with a few ascetics. He gave up all his worldly possessions. And he overhears two individuals on a fishing boat. And one of them says, if you hold the string too loose, it won't play. And if you hold it too tight, it will snap. The path is the middle way. And so for me, I said, oh, the middle way is having body autonomy. I could say yes to the chemo, but I can leave this place and I can, for the next few months, research and do other integrated modalities. So that's what I chose to do. So I think when it comes to uncertainty, no one knows. You just have to sort of deal with the feelings of it. But you also have to be reassured with the fact, as I did, and reframe a couple of things. So I looked at chemo not as poisonous. I looked at it as an elixir. If you, once again, have biblical overtures, you could say it's a mana from the universe or life force. And because I knew I needed to submit and I needed to accept what's actually happening to me. So that's number one. And probably the second thing that I did is I didn't allow myself to be identified with someone going through cancer. I allowed myself as someone who at this moment in time needed assistance, needed help. And the help came in the form of medicines that are engineered and scientifically tested to do what they needed to do. So I needed to submit to those things as well.
Man, you mentioned a second ago where there was a dominant thought in your mind of like, man, like I don't know if I really fully lived, right? Like that's incredible. And so sometimes like I'm actually associating that with success. Like, hey, what was my life up to this point from my definition, successful? You're like, man, did I even live? Did I maximize my potential? Like, and so I'm wondering, was there a moment where you realized that your old definition of success no longer worked?
Yeah. So I never really defined success as things in the material world. And one can say, well, how could you say that? You have all these credentials and titles behind your name. Yeah, okay, maybe there is something true about that. But for me, success was really about what is it that I became through the situation? What did I become through cancer? What did I become through loss? What did I become through, if I think back early, I was part of the .com crash that happened back in the 90s. All these things, what did I become through it? Because it wasn't really about experiencing it, is what did I actually ascertain? What did I actually learn from it? What allowed me to grow out of my particular placehold or society's vision of what I wanted to be, or my family's even vision on what I wanted to be.
I really like that perspective, because it is, something happened, and like how does it change me for the better is essentially the frame of mind here. When you're working with like high performers, like with leadership, and they make mistakes, what's that kind of transference of that mindset where you're like that you also are encouraging to take that same frame?
Yeah. So it goes back to my central thesis. I think we were cut off earlier, but like performance doesn't fail first, clarity does. And so most of them don't really have the clarity. I mean, why is it? It's one of my favorite shows right now, which is The Pit. Obviously, it's on a hiatus. But why do I like that show? Does it wreck my nervous system watching it? Yeah. Do I need to do vagus nerve stimulation afterwards? Yeah, I do actually have to do it afterwards. But I love the show because it gives voice to the humanity behind the people that you think are taking care of you, because they themselves are not taking care of themselves. So when I deal with leadership, especially healthcare leaderships, what are they facing? High stakes, obviously, themselves, their team, their organization, but also another human being in front of them. And that is serious. Then they deal with cognitive overload, serious cognitive pressure that's actually happening within that. And then they lose their balance. Self-regulation is out the window completely. They don't create any type of level of psychological distancing, psychological safety. If you ask teams of whether or not they feel trusted or vulnerable in healthcare, some of them actually rate it really low. Why is that? Because they themselves are not exuding or amplifying, exemplifying or embodying what they choose to actually tell a patient to do. And so it's really hard. It's not about blaming. It's just about bringing to the surface exactly what can be tightened.
Yeah, I'd like to continue on that too, where you mentioned like, hey, it's high stakes. It can be chaotic. It's kind of electrifying for a lot of them, right? Depending on maybe where they are in healthcare, right?
Yeah.
And what we've noticed on our end is that there are some high performers that create a crisis to feel alive, to create almost like they're creating a problem so they can work on a solution. What do you feel like they should do instead? And have you experienced that? Have you observed people do that?
Well, if you think about pressure in general, there are some good pressures, right? Diamond doesn't form without pressure. But in a work setting, I don't think that actually works. So how do people deal with crisis? They actually pretend that it doesn't exist sometimes. And then they think that they just need to overcome the crisis. But really, the magic is really after the crisis. How are you going to reorientate? How are you going to recalibrate? How are you going to actually figure out a new way forward? Because the old way didn't really obviously work. Problems occurred. And so really it's about resourcing themselves, figuring out for themselves to some degree what I figured out, which was two anchors, which was silence and stillness. 29 days in the hospital. What else do I have besides that? And I was able to sink myself into that. That's available anytime, anywhere. And so I often tell individuals it's not about creating, yes, you can do things like meditate, which I do. You can journal, you can do humming, you can do yoga, you can do all these sorts of things, but it's really creating that intentional silence, just plain silence, because the more you tap into that nature, that element, then you become more focused on what it is you actually need to get done, not the things that always come your way in terms of regulations, in terms of the actual day-to-day work, but it's really things that actually matter to a patient. I will say, after my second relapse, my second bout with cancer, my relapse, I had the best health care. It was amazing. It was so amazing to me that one weekend on a Saturday, I woke up and they have those big clocks in the hospital room. I'm looking at it. It said 5:30. I'm like, Dr. Steinberg, And he's like, yeah, Mr. Clemente. He's like, I just can't do rounds later today, so I just wanted to come and do them. I'm like, but it's 5:30. And he's like, yeah, I wanted to make sure you're okay. I'm like, what? And then he came on Sunday as well. So, you know, as much as people complain about healthcare and as much as I see the problems within it, I have to say my lived experience gave me such a beautiful picture of it.
No, I love that. And I appreciate the heart, so to speak, that you have for that person who's taking care of you. It's like, dude, you have a life too. Go home. Like, what are you doing here? But, you know, there's other aspect too, though, that not every organization, hospitals are different, right? It's a completely different beast.
Yep.
You know, for somebody who's not in a hospital setting, they might be looking or listening and saying, well, I'm not really dealing with crisis a lot.
Okay.
But I feel like I'm on all the time.
Mm-hmm.
People are coming to me all day long. I'm putting out fires, and I'm wiped, right? So when we look at the problem solving that has to happen throughout the day, every single day, at what point, you know, if you're talking to somebody like that, at what point does that really become a liability, or, you know, a liability instead of a strength? Because there are some people, you know, even Antonio was mentioning those people who create a crisis sometimes to feel alive or to create a problem to solve, so to speak. So when does that go from being a liability instead of a strength?
Well, I think if you're any type of clinical setting where you're creating a problem to solve when a problem doesn't exist, you need to do what Yoda suggests, which is search your feelings on that. Like, why are you creating that in the first place? I mean, that's a little
Shout
odd.
out to Yoda. Yeah.
But if you're not in a clinical setting or hospital setting where, like you mentioned, these things don't relate, how do you get more centered? I don't know. I could tell you a whole bunch of things that has worked for other clients and people that on the stages that I speak for. But I think we live in an individualized world right now where it's no longer about gaining content. It's about gaining connection. And the way to gain connection with other people is to gain connection with yourself. So how do you find that semblance? I don't know. Prayer, figuring, could I give you data points on what has worked for people? But that's all in the mental body. That's all in the mental sphere of thinking. The work that I do goes beyond just the talk therapy. It's about embodiment. It's about where do you actually feel it? What are you sensing? What is that image or a sound or a vehicle that's actually pushing you towards something or away from something? How is it that you've resourced that particular type of feeling, this pain point of this problem? How have you resourced this in the past? It's not about have you experienced it in the past, it's what have you done with this feeling that you're feeling now in the past? Where has that been mirrored to you, and how have you solved it? That's a great way of doing it. Another third way of doing it is really to figure out for you, like you said, is this an actual problem, or is this an actual way to create something to do? Because a lot of people like to be busy, and the busyness is where most of us get caught up.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to lead to. It's just a lot of those individuals, and I not say I create my own problems, but there's definitely been that time where I'm just, all right, I'm bored as hell, you know. So it's you work on skills, what have you, but some people are like, I'm bored. Let me just create an issue, or, you know, maybe it's not I'm actually causing some damage to my business or my company, but maybe I can just dig into something and focus on the negative aspect, you know, the 5% that's going wrong in my company versus focusing on the 95% that's going real well. So I think, you know, for that person, we're like, all right, well, I'm running a business. Aren't I supposed to be busy all day long and being productive? Because we do measure time and tasks as productivity. How do you kind of switch them off? You know, I appreciate what you're saying here about creating different frames. When you're talking to that individual, what's the switch that you would put to say, all right, this is how I get you thinking in this way in terms of what you could do with that time versus creating self-manufactured problems?
I would say a great exercise is something I talked about on my TEDx talk. I did it a few years before my relapse. And I talk about something called the Aloha Reboot. We all know aloha in Hawaiian means hello. So it's a hello to your inner self. And it's really simple. 7 minutes. And the title of the TEDx talk is called 7 Minutes to Wellness, How to Love Your Inner Stranger. And people ask me all the time, they're like, what do you mean inner stranger? And I'm like, well, I left it, you know, vague on purpose. And they're like, why? Okay, so what's your inner stranger? Like, my inner stranger is that, if I had to be truthful, that young person who never really felt totally connected or grounded. I didn't have any problems. I wasn't bullied. I was friends with a lot of people. I just never felt totally connected. And they're like, oh, I get it. So, like, my inner stranger is that, like, successful businesswoman I want to be that I just can't be, or that great mother or that great sibling that I want to be that I just can't seem to reach. And so the Aloha Reboot is really simple acronym. A stands for acknowledge. So like my situation, acknowledge where I am. I'm in the hospital every 4 hours. They do vitals. People, doctors, 13 deep come and do rounds. I'm tied to these machines. There's noise happening. Just acknowledge. L stands for listening. So listen to your inner self. Now in Hawaiian healing modalities, there's a healing modality called huna healing. And in huna healing, they actually believe that the body not only sends us sensations, but it actually has consciousness. It has resonance. There's actually something that it's speaking to us. The only way to get in touch with it is to have silence and stillness, those anchors I mentioned earlier. So they believe you can actually talk to those body parts. I call it the three brains, head, heart, and gut. But I often tell people you don't need to do this in front of other people because that looks a little strange. Just do it in the privacy of your own home. O stands for opening. So open yourself up to this. It's not a belief system. It's just trying to explore yourself. H stands for harnessing. So harness this information. See what works, what doesn't work. What are the connections? What actually can you actually implement? And A stands for acting, but there's a caveat. You have to have courage to act. A lot of the data actually points to the fact that it's not that people don't want to change. People don't know how to change. So there is something called the trans-theoretical model of change, or the stages of change. And it posits that people are not, they're thinking about changing, pre-contemplation, in change. They're in change, they're thinking about relapsing. So where are they on that stages of change, and how to actually get them closer to what they want to accomplish? And that takes courage. Someone once said to me, I can't do 7 minutes. I'm like, okay, do one of those acronyms a day for 5 days and practice that. And so I offer that as just a very simple way, because everyone has an excuse why they can't do anything. Once again, like I mentioned, at the end of the day, we don't have a content problem. We can get that in seconds. We have a connection problem. And the connection problem then leads to the fact that your connection with yourself is so disjointed and so far from where your reality wants to be that you end up then creating these buffers or these problems. And then you really, what I call the post-crisis leadership gap, there's a gap that happens, and then it drifts, and then it shifts, and then it's just a huge chasm. And so how do you get yourself through that? You actually have to be really, really, really focused on what is the problem and how can you actually solve that right now. Like not tomorrow, but like right now. And if you can't solve it right now, figure out steps on how that problem might not be a problem right now. Maybe it's something that you're just creating.
You know, I love they went through all that. And we're talking to an orthopedic surgeon and professor, Dr. Daniel Eifferman. He was talking about something similar in the sense of dealing with complications from the doctor side, or something didn't go right, or just, you did a procedure and it failed, or just didn't work. It's like how to actually recover. And he said something very similar. It's not the actual complications that are the major issues, how you recover from that going forward. And it sounds like something like you're saying too, in the sense of how to actually really learn from the experience and improve. And, when you're working with these individuals, would you say it's more about learning from the experience and then growing? Or is it just, how do we get you back to baseline? What would you say is really more, I know you got to get to baseline first, but what would you say is like the main crux of what you'd like to get with somebody at minimum?
Well, you speak with doctors, right? Why do you think they often say doctors don't make the great patients? Because they themselves don't have patience to become great patients.
Correct.
And so at the end of the day, getting to baseline is good enough, I think. But I would argue that I think the purpose of our lives, to some degree, at least for the majority of us, maybe not all of us, is to find some way of creating freedom. How do you create freedom? You actually take away things rather than adding things. If there's a pot that's in front of me and it's filled with water, in order to pour new fresh waters, I got to get rid of the contents within the pot. So I often tell people all the time, we are in a catch-release type of situation. Let's catch and let's release. And Eastern philosophy, I grew up Catholic, but since college and up until now, I've studied a lot of belief systems, from Buddhism to Vedic philosophy and also Jewish mysticism. And Eastern philosophy often speaks to this idea of the seed doesn't rush and the river doesn't rush. The seed has its own formation, its structure underneath that we cannot see. And the river, even though there's a rock or something abutting it, it will find a way to go under, over, across, or it will just be still. But it knows that it's coming around the bend. It knows its direction. And so I offer that as well, just to really point out to the fact that this is sort of an adventure. And yeah, things suck. I mean, I'm a 2-time cancer survivor, for heaven's sake. It's like a dramatic story. Did I want that title? No, but it happened. And so I'd rather speak about the walk rather than about the wound. Because if I speak about the wound, it does no one any good, including myself.
Yeah. With what you're saying, like, it does sound like a lot of the doctors, a lot of the executives, like it's so much easier to deal with the, chaos going around them, all the activities going around them. And one of the scariest things is, like, you got to kind of look within, you got to take the time to actually go on the inside. And you mentioned, studying, Buddhism, Jewish mysticism, you're raised Catholic, so was I. And is that something that you also do encourage, where it's like, you should maybe look from a faith perspective and look at these other kind of modules of thought around the world. And along the way, you can almost kind of treat it like a barbecue or a buffet of you're pulling things that resonate with you and allow you to kind of sit with who you are and discover who you are by just maybe dedicating some time to learn of what works around the world.
So I'm not a doctor. I'm not a therapist. I know my lane. I'm a board certified health and wellness coach. And if you're someone who actually has studied and actually has received the certifications I have, you know that coaching is not about being prescriptive. It's really about allowing people to discover what actually works with them. It's about allowing them to figure out what sticks. And so what I would say is, yes, do I offer these things as a reflection point or as a point of interest for people? Of course I do, because then I do themselves a disservice. But I also do myself a disservice by doing that. But at the end of the day, I think to a large degree, and I feel to a large degree, so I'm using both words here, that a lot of people want to actually think that the external world is the problem when the reality of the matter is our internal world is. So yes, am I saying that cancer happened because no, I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that in order to solve a problem, as Einstein pointed out, we have to go with a different level of consciousness as the person who created the problem. So to answer your question, these things are offered. Whether or not people actually participate in it or want it is a whole different story.
I'm glad you read my mind, because that's exactly where I wanted to go with this, which is there's just a lot of things that I see in healthcare where, and it's rightfully so, but there's so many people who just want to complain about all the crap that's going on in healthcare, right? It's just insurance is terrible, everything is understaffed, and I get it, right? I'm right there with them. But then there's minimal people who, to your point, want to say, all right, what is within our ability to actually improve, right? And so when I look at something even, we talk a lot on the show about burnout, and I think that's something you are probably coaching these executives on as well. It's all, I look at it too. It's just not a matter of, all right, I have a lot of patients. It's also, all right, what kind of systems have you put in place for yourself? Not even just maybe operational workflows within the structure of your organization or your department, but personally speaking. So when you're working with these executives too, and I don't even have time to think, man. I'm burned out. I'm exhausted. When I do have time, it's just Netflix and chill for me. I know, right? You told me about this Aloha framework, and I did it. But then I'm at I'm working for 12, 14 hours straight. How do I manage that during the day? What would be your prescriptive advice, so to speak, on that?
Okay. So currently I'm running a interview series with CEOs and CMOs called the Healthcare Leadership Operating System. And one data point really was staggering to me. I interviewed a doctor who actually mentioned, a CMO, who actually mentioned that healthcare's impact right now in terms of waste is anywhere from $760 billion to $935 billion yearly in the U.S.
I'd say I'm shocked, but that seems about right.
That's staggering if you really think about it. But at the end of the day, is it?
Can you elaborate on what that is, just for audiences, with the waste?
I mean, this was a direct quote from him. He didn't actually go into great detail as to what the waste was, but he offered a data point, which then I was like, is this actually true? And so, like you said, it's true. So what I'm saying is that just in equipment, or no? That's in bad decision making. That's in pressured and actually making decisions that actually don't necessarily benefit anyone, including the doctor themselves. And so that's the root cause of it. If you're actually talking about root causes, which all the wellness people like to talk about all the time, at the end of the day, that's the root cause of it, is that we need to actually fix that. So going back to your question, yeah, I'm tired. Well, then you know what? If you're tired and you don't want to actually create actionable steps to alleviate or to fix or to make better, then I'm not telling them to question their livelihood or their industry, but you really need to actually see what is it that actually lights you up. There's a organizational, I think she's a fashion organizer named Maria Kondo, and it's really funny because she goes through clothes and she says, does this spark joy or does it not? Throw it away. And so I'm not telling them to do that, but you need to really ask yourself these kinds of questions, like, is this something I'm actually grateful for? Is this something that lights me up? Is this something that sparks joy in me? Or is this something that I'm just doing because it's a great job and I dedicated, if it's a doctor, I dedicated like 18 to 20 years of my life. You know,
right.
I can imagine that's hard to come across that, but I just taking from someone who almost died twice, I think it's important to do that.
I'm a strong believer that within any type of organization and any type of business, that it's almost like you're raising kids, in the sense that it takes a community to raise a kid. It's like it takes a village to raise a kid. And, Dan and I, we've worked at some companies where we know what the CEO is going through, just kind of behind the scenes. And we coach some of the employees of like, hey, keep an eye out for this, because if they're demonstrating this is some ways that you can kind of help them get back on target. So the first part of this question is, what are the warning signs that a leader is making, that they're making decisions from exhaustion rather than clarity?
Misalignment is the number one. Disinterest, skirting, obviously, issues. They call them, these terminologies, strategic reversals, increasing ramp, all those things that they want to actually have flourish, but it just doesn't. They themselves, once again, are not regulated enough to actually figure out that maybe it's not the other people that's the problem. Maybe it's the directive that's the problem. And maybe how can we actually make that directive a lot more smoother and more understandable? This goes back to like the core tenets of leadership. At the end of the day, people often assume that leadership is about some corporate setting. And no, leadership is just about how people want to emulate you, mirror you, follow you. And they actually want to take those particulars and try to embed them in their own lives. So if you're telling me or saying to me that the people that you've worked with and or the CEOs that you worked with seem to some degree apathetic or disinterested or not as focused on the overall goal, what's the overall goal? The overall goal is to help patients. That's the overall goal. But if the overall goal is something else, then you need to sort of search within yourself once again. What is the motivating factor? Where is your motivation coming from? Is it coming from something that you are willing to want to do to serve others? Or is it coming from a different place that's maybe a little darker?
Yeah. Can employees feel when leadership is cognitively overloaded? And what do you tell, what could they do to help when they do observe it?
So I'm laughing at that because
for someone, no, it's a good one. Yeah.
No, for someone to observe it myself, it's very, very clear, but I could see where other people miss the signs. Absolutely. I mean, if there is some level of mistrust there, I mean, we talk a lot about psychological safety. What's psychological safety? Creating trust, but also creating vulnerability within teams. That's how you allow people to actually give their best and also be committed to shared goals. If you don't, then it falls by the wayside. I think communication is a big thing. I'm a huge believer in naming things, not naming things for identity, because then people get caught up in the identity, but naming things so that you can at least create a little bit of distance, a buffer like I did in the hospital, create that in order to fully ascertain exactly what's happening.
I love that. You said a few things, and I kind of want to unpack a little bit of them, but the aspect of leaders essentially modeling, the behavior, that I do think that's something that we in leadership positions tend to forget, right? It's just, I'm going to act on, basically like I'm drinking 10 Red Bulls a day is how I'm acting throughout the day. I'm making rash decisions or maybe emotional decisions. And then I'm expecting my team to act with a lot of clarity it would be like an owner saying, I want everybody who's accountable, but then I don't keep myself accountable. Well, they're looking to you to set the standard, and I do think that's something that a lot of leaders forget. So I definitely appreciate that aspect of it. But you also, getting into leadership a little bit more, you talked about the aspect of high performers, this myth, so to speak, that a high performer on a team, maybe not even an executive, just somebody who's maybe running a department or, a great manager, that they need more motivation. I do think that's what a lot of people at the top is. I got to keep my team motivated, keep them going. But you think it's something completely different. So I'd like to have you just unpack that a little bit for us.
This brings me back to all this talk that people used to have about intelligence being the number one trait. And then we were told, no, emotional intelligence is, but actually what the science is pointing to and the data is pointing to is metacognition, which is something I practiced in 29 days in the hospital. It's like, who's the Savio that's stuck to this hospital bed for 29 days? And who's those other parts of myself? Who's doing the thinking? Who's actually working on that? And actually, that's really intriguing, because when you can actually get closer to understanding empathy and getting away from a little bit of bro culture, I mean, that's really pervasive in the, especially with male-dominated doctors and healthcare leadership teams. That actually creates distance, because then people don't feel like they're included. And when they don't feel like they're included, and then you have, political, social strife that's currently rampant in what's happening right now. There is a company right now, which I think is really cool. I had a meeting with them about 2 weeks ago. They're actually backed by Y Combinator. They're going to be the first wearable to measure EQ, which is really fascinating to me. They're going to send me the wearable, and I'm writing a story about it, which I'm really excited about. Because EQ helps us recognize the emotion, but metacognition helps us recognize how pressure is shaping the perception, judgment, and also behavior. So I'm really fascinated to actually see how this in real life works. And they're actually really on the ball. They're allowing you to sync not only your music taste, your schedule, but also other data points, and it's from just from a vanity perspective, the way they designed the wearable is completely new, and I wouldn't expect anything less. I mean, Y Combinator only backs a few projects a year, so that's pretty substantial.
Yeah, and I look forward to actually, that'd be definitely pretty dope to check out. When we're talking about this aspect of how do you keep your A players or high performers really moving in the right direction, making sure they're not getting bored, and that's where I think a lot of people, it's just, all right, I got this horse on my team, very engaged, patient driven, but is a hustler. Let me give them more and more, versus, hey, you know what? Where's there time and space to give this person some opportunity to maybe think about how they could, help the organization or improve patient care, or just improve their own trajectory within the business or group or whatever part they're with. When you're looking at leadership overall, I'm curious to know what's maybe a belief that you used to have after all these years now that you've reversed on or just changed a bit.
A belief that I had that I no longer have?
Yeah, a belief around leadership that you used to have that you don't have anymore.
I think, the idea of performance. Not everything has to be optimized. Everyone wants to optimize stuff. And yeah, I talked about a wearable, but their metrics are going to be a lot different. But everyone wants to optimize, but recovery and actually coming back to form or coming back to some level of baseline or success, it doesn't always have to be about that. That recovery, in any sense of the word, whether it's physical recovery or the recovery of said objective in a company, is all about allowing time to elapse.
I got something for you. So it sounds like you are very much on the cutting edge, like you mentioned, metacognition, this EQ wearable. What do you believe is something that every leader should maybe stop doing? You mentioned everyone wants to optimize everything. And if you talk to a leader, like, I want to optimize everything. I would imagine you'd be like, okay, let's maybe stop doing this immediately. What's kind of the general thing that you would suggest people do?
I would say a number one thing to do is to create that intentional silence. And I know it sounds simplistic, but it's really hard to practice when you actually are focused on it, because it creates this level of responsibility that most people don't want to take responsibility for a lot of things. Second thing I would actually say, within all the 2,000 plus interviews I've done, with leaders and even with celebrities, including the 200 interviews I've done with cancer survivors. Common thread I saw all the time was this idea of forgiveness, but not forgiveness for someone else, but self-forgiveness for themselves. The steps they didn't take, the mistakes they made, the things they should have said yes to that they didn't, or the things they said no to that they should have said yes to. It's just a central theme, and maybe it's the coach brain, speaker brain, and the journalist brain in me, but I saw it consistently and constantly. And then really the third thing I would say, even though you asked me, I think for one, would be something that actually I saw reflected in an experience I had. So 3 or 4 months before I had my cancer relapse in June of 2024, my editor gave me an assignment. I cover health, wellness, and leadership. And he's like, do you want to go to cover the red carpet at the Oscars? I'm like, what? He's like, yeah. I'm like, okay. So I had a friend who lived in LA. He took me to see Venice and Malibu, which I'd never been. This was before the fires, obviously. Oh. And I was there on the red carpet with a whole bunch of really uber publications. The celebrities came, and I realized something very, very easily and very quickly. They're all acting. I thought they were like real people and I'm going to have a conversation. No, they are trying to save good face for me as a journalist, their handlers, their managers, and also the photographers. And it was an important lesson in learning that this is just pervasive throughout. And doctors do it and healthcare leaders do it. I, to some degree, you could say I've done it less. But I think, once again, I think I mentioned it earlier, we don't have a content problem, we have a connection problem. Because content can be manipulated easily through what is being seen through media, and I'm part of the media, and also content can be easily given through the advent of AI.
Especially like a connection with oneself, and kind of staying on maybe the philosophical road. What's one question leaders you think should ask themselves weekly?
I would actually implore them to ask themselves, are they any much more satisfied than they were previously? Previous to last week, previous to the day before, previous to the year before, whatever the metric, whatever the standard is for them, I would actually ask them that question of satisfaction. Because satisfaction really leads to higher states of being, more devotion in things, allowing you to actually prosper better. So satisfaction is really a key barometer that I use often.
I like that because I do think there is also this aspect where we're trying to, a lot of people define their life by am I happy, but then your definition is a little bit different. But then you could also ask that person, are you fulfilled or satisfied? And they'd say, no, I'm not. So it's that I think, and certainly looking over the research, even for maybe just not the high performers and executives and leaders, is, when we're looking at organizations, it's the goal is not necessarily to keep people happy. It's about how do you get them fulfilled, right? How do you kind of tie what you're doing to maybe a higher purpose, so to speak. And in medicine, obviously, me being in healthcare, that's definitely something that I think every day was just, all right, why am I doing this? And even talking to other clinicians and providers is, all right, why'd you go to school? Let's remember why we did this. I know there's some crap we're dealing with, but again, a bulk of the day is pretty damn good. You're getting to do something that a lot of people don't get to do, which is help people feel better. So there's something to be said for that. When you're looking overall at your journey, from where you were to where you are now, what's one thing that you learned along the way that took you, in your estimation, far too long to maybe completely understand or appreciate?
Well, I have to speak about the happiness. Happiness is something that sometimes doesn't feel attainable, so people are always searching for it. It's a huge level to hit, and it's just not sustainable. Something that I learned, it wasn't actually something that I myself discovered. It's something that actually was told to me, and it's central to a lot of how I view things and situations and people and the work that I do and even my life and what I've been through, is that when truth is given to you and you find an error in the truth, you don't discard the truth, you discard the error. You put the error to the side, but you never discard the truth. Because the truth is always strident. It's there for a reason. I think we all get lost in the complex and disruptive world we live in to actually think that I can just toss away that truth, as opposed to tossing away what doesn't really work.
I got a couple final questions, and one of them, it's a little bit of a curveball, but it sounds like you dove into a lot of scientific literature. You're on the cutting edge of just different things that could be helpful, getting into EQ. But on this podcast, you've quoted several movies, and I'm curious for you because I believe that that's also a medium that people can acquire lessons. What are a couple really good movies? You imagine like Rudy, and all these other movies out there where you feel fired up or you feel like there's a moment of clarity. What are a couple of movies that you've seen where you're like, there's some really good lessons here?
So I would say the one that is bubbling to me is the Shawshank Redemption. Get busy living or get busy dying. Love that. I just saw the recent movie called Pressure about D-Day and the Eisenhower period. And there was a quote in there that was a really subtle quote in there, but it was really about this idea that you need to be really clear, and the person was really clear, even though the other individual stated that quote unquote a weather situation was going to be fine. He was very clear in stating no, and I think just his way of saying no. I know that's not a quote officially, but just the way he said that was great. Yeah.
And the last one here is, for the leaders listening right now that, they do feel exhausted. They do feel overwhelmed. They do feel kind of stuck in that constant pressure. I know that you hit on a lot of really good points of what they could do, but what would be the first thing they should do tomorrow morning?
I think they really need to just do a brain dump and figure out for themselves what's actually happening here. There's so many things that we actually keep locked in our head and locked in our phone that we don't examine fully. And I think it's important to just let vomit that out a little bit on paper or digitally, whatever suits your boat. And I'm not even saying you can then take it to AI and make that. Yeah, you could do all that. I'm just talking about allow yourself and release yourself from some of the things that you're carrying, because, and I will quote, not a movie, but a singer named Erykah Badu, who talked about Bag Lady. And in the song she mentioned, didn't anyone ever tell you could get rid of the bags?
Mm. All right, we're going to end it right there. Nah, that was really good. Savio, man, this was honestly phenomenal. I'm going to have all your resources in the show description, but just for the listener, what's the best place for them to reach you if they want to maybe, get a hold of you, maybe do some coaching?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, saviopclemente.com, SAVIOPCLEMENTE.com. I have my keynote work. I have a few more keynotes left for 2026. I also have my book, and I also have my coaching, like you mentioned. And then every Wednesday, I release a Substack newsletter called The Human Resolve, where I talk about head, heart, and gut intelligence. And like I mentioned, I have a CEO and CMO interview series running currently that they can look into. And if they want to find me on social media, I'm at every location at The Human Resolve, because I believe that we only have two things right now. We have resolution and resolve to figure out.
Yeah, I just got to say that you're not doing enough. You got to up your game, man. Come on.
Yeah, dude.
Three
out of 10. Come on now.
Second chance at life. Yeah, it's like, I'm going to be an action taker. You're barely doing anything. Come on. That was great. I love it. Dude, we could honestly go probably a few more hours, but we're going to wrap it. This is great. Appreciate you joining us. Guys, you catch us next time. Take care.
Later, everybody. Thanks, Savio.
Cool.